9 minutes to decide who owned the canyon. Trapped behind shredded vehicles, 5 Border Patrol agents counted dwindling ammunition as cartel fire pinned them down. The sicarios advanced confidently, 15 armed men against wounded prey. They never bothered looking up at the ridgeline where 4 shadow figures now settled into position. The radio crackled with a single message. Stalker teams acquired. Weapons free. But before we jump back into the video, let us know where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe because I have something really special for you tomorrow. And now, back to the video. Marine Scout snipers, deployed from rapid response helicopters, began their silent count. 1 heartbeat, 2 heartbeats. At 700 meters, the first shot broke the desert stillness, followed by precision elimination that turned hunters into targets. The cartel brought overwhelming force to an ambush. The Marines brought something deadlier, surgical violence from unseen positions. Special Agent Miguel Ramirez pressed a blood-soaked hand against the remnants of the patrol vehicle's door. The desert heat seemed to amplify the smell of gunpowder and blood. Just 30 minutes ago, he'd been joking with Martinez about weekend plans. Now Martinez lay motionless beside him, a tourniquet above his knee turning crimson beneath the relentless Arizona sun. "Cruz, what's your ammo situation?" Ramirez called out, voice steady despite the chaos. Officer Lucia Cruz, 30 yards away, behind an outcropping of rocks, held up 3 fingers. 3 rounds left. The cartel gunmen were getting bolder, creeping forward between sporadic gunfire. They knew the agents were running out of options. Through his cracked binoculars, Ramirez could make out their leader, a man in a black tactical vest with a gold-plated pistol, directing the others with casual authority. These weren't ordinary smugglers. The precision of their ambush, their equipment, their coordination. This was Sangre Nueva, the brutal enforcement arm of the Sonora cartel. A bullet ricocheted off the vehicle hood inches from Ramirez's face, showering him with hot metal fragments. He ducked lower, checking his own sidearm. 4 rounds remaining, not enough. "Dispatch, this is Agent Ramirez. We need immediate air support. We are pinned down in Diamondback Canyon. Coordinates 31.4721 north, 111.0564 west. Multiple wounded, hostile forces advancing." His voice cracked as he spoke into the radio. Static answered him. The canyon walls were blocking transmission. "They're flanking east," shouted Agent Diaz, blood streaming from a gash across his forehead. "We can't hold this position." Ramirez's mind raced. 5 agents, 2 seriously wounded, 15 cartel gunmen with automatic weapons and the high ground. No radio contact, no escape route. He looked at Martinez, his friend's face ashen from blood loss. "I'm not letting you die here," he whispered. In the distance, barely audible over gunfire, came the rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors. The cartel noticed too. Their leader gestured frantically, and the gunmen increased their fire, determined to finish off the agents before reinforcements arrived. What the cartel didn't see were the 4 Marines already in position. Staff Sergeant Jackson Cole, recon sniper, team leader, lay perfectly still on the ridge overlooking the canyon. His spotter, Corporal Wei Chen, monitored the scene through a high-powered scope. Target 1, cartel leader, black vest, gold pistol. Range 724 meters. Wind 3 knots left to right, Chen whispered. Cole made minute adjustments to his M40A6 sniper rifle. His breathing slowed. The world narrowed to a single point, the space between his crosshairs and the cartel leader's chest. "Send it," Chen confirmed. Cole exhaled halfway and squeezed the trigger. The cartel leader was mid-sentence when the bullet struck. One moment commanding, the next collapsed. Before his body hit the ground, Cole had already shifted to his next target. Ramirez heard the distinct crack of the sniper rifle echo across the canyon, followed by the thud of a body falling. The sicarios froze, confusion replacing confidence as another shot rang out. Then another. "Marines," Ramirez breathed, hope surging through his exhaustion. Above them, the Black Hawk helicopter appeared over the ridge, more Marine marksmen visible in the open doors. The tide was turning, but the cartel gunmen weren't retreating. Instead, they intensified their assault, focusing fire on the wounded agents. They'd come too far to leave witnesses. Ramirez met Cruz's eyes across the battlefield and nodded. For 9 minutes, they would fight for ownership of this canyon, and unknown to the cartel, The desert had already chosen its victors. The El Centro Border Patrol station hummed with activity as Agent Miguel Ramirez pushed through the double doors, coffee in hand. The AC hit him like a wall after the scorching Imperial Valley heat outside. 6 years with Border Patrol had trained his body to function on minimal sleep and maximum caffeine. Today marked his 34th birthday, though he hadn't mentioned it to anyone. Birthdays lost their shine after your 20s, especially when you spent them tracking smugglers through desert terrain. Morning, sunshine. Agent Lucia Cruz looked up from her computer, dark circles under her eyes betraying her own exhaustion. At 29, she was the newest addition to their tactical response team, transferred from the Tucson sector after distinguishing herself during a high-risk pursuit. Sleep well? Like a baby, Ramirez lied, setting his mug down. The nightmares had returned last night, memories of the Coyote Springs incident last year, where they'd found 23 migrants dead in an abandoned truck. The children's faces still haunted him. Bullshit. Cruz knew him too well already. You look like you wrestled a cactus and lost. Thanks for the compliment. He managed a smile. Where's Martinez? Briefing room with Diaz and the others. Hernandez says we've got something big coming down. Ramirez raised an eyebrow. Section Chief Hernandez rarely called all team briefings unless intelligence suggested significant cartel movement. He grabbed his coffee and followed Cruz down the hallway. The briefing room was already packed when they entered. Agent Diaz nodded toward 2 empty seats near the front. At 47, Diaz was the veteran of their unit, his weathered face bearing the marks of 2 decades patrolling the merciless desert borderlands. Beside him sat Martinez, who was busy sketching something in his notebook. The third-generation Border Patrol agent always claimed he thought better when doodling. Morning, birthday boy, Martinez whispered, sliding a protein bar across the table. Breakfast of champions. Before Ramirez could respond, Section Chief Hernandez entered, followed by a man in a crisp FBI windbreaker. The room fell silent. Agents, this is Special Agent Thomas Warren from the FBI's Border Security Task Force. Hernandez's tone was grave. He's here to brief us on a developing situation. Warren wasted no time. He clicked a remote, and the screen behind him filled with surveillance photos. For the past 6 months, we've been tracking an emerging faction within the Sonora cartel called Sangre Nueva, New Blood. Warren cycled through images of heavily armed men moving through desert terrain. Unlike the old guard, these aren't just drug smugglers. They're former military, some with special forces training, who've turned their skills to cartel work. He clicked to an image of a man with a distinctive scar running from his left eye to his jaw. This is Alejandro Vega, former Mexican Army Special Operations, now Sangre Nueva's field commander. Intelligence suggests he's personally responsible for at least 38 killings in the last year alone. Martinez whispered, "Cheerful guy." Warren continued, ignoring the comment. 3 days ago, our informants reported that Vega is planning something unprecedented, a direct confrontation with U.S. Border Patrol to establish dominance in the Diamondback Canyon corridor. The room tensed. Cartels typically avoided direct engagement with U.S. law enforcement, preferring to bribe, evade, or intimidate from a distance. Why now? Ramirez asked, leaning forward. That's an unnecessary escalation, even for Sangre Nueva. Warren nodded approvingly at the question. 2 reasons. First, Vega needs to cement his reputation within the cartel hierarchy. Second, and more importantly, we believe they're moving something so valuable through that corridor that they're willing to risk direct confrontation to protect it. What are they moving? Cruz asked. That's where it gets complicated. Warren clicked to a new slide showing intercepted communications. Initially, we thought drugs, the usual cocaine or fentanyl shipments. But the security protocols they're implementing suggest something more sensitive. Possibly weapons-grade materials, or bioweapons technology, a murmur ran through the room. This was far beyond their usual interdiction missions. So what's the plan? Diaz asked, his gravelly voice cutting through the chatter. Sounds like we need a military response, not just patrol units. Hernandez stepped forward. We're coordinating with multiple agencies, but we can't wait for full military deployment. Intelligence suggests the shipment moves in the next 72 hours. We need enhanced patrols in the Diamondback sector immediately. He unrolled a topographic map of the canyon system. we'll establish 5 checkpoint positions along the likely routes. Agent Ramirez will lead Alpha Team here at the southern entrance. Cruz, you'll take Bravo position on the eastern ridge. Martinez, Charlie position at the northern pass. Diaz, you'll coordinate from Delta Point with satellite communications. Ramirez studied the map, a sense of unease growing in his gut. The positions were tactically sound, but spread thin. Sir, with respect, that's a lot of territory for small teams to cover if Sangre Nueva comes in force. That's why you'll have backup. Warren nodded to Hernandez, who clicked to the final slide. We've arranged for Marine Scout sniper teams to be on standby at Fort Huachuca, Hernandez explained. 4-man units can deploy by helicopter within 20 minutes of our distress call. Martinez whistled low. Scout snipers? This is serious. Dead serious, Warren confirmed. Vega doesn't mess around, and neither do we. If he's planning what we think, we need to be prepared for the worst. After the briefing, Ramirez lingered at the map, memorizing terrain features and possible ambush points. The canyon's system was treacherous. Narrow passages opening into wider areas, perfect for trapping unwary patrols. You're overthinking again, Cruz said, appearing beside him. I can hear the gears grinding from here. Something feels off, Ramirez admitted. If Vega's as smart as they say, he'll know we're monitoring those routes. So, we'll be ready for his alternative plans. She studied his face. What's really bothering you, Miguel? Ramirez hesitated. In their line of work, instincts often made the difference between life and death. Last time, we had intel this precise. It turned out to be a setup. Remember the Nogales operation? Someone fed us information to draw us into a specific area. You think we have a leak? I think we need to be prepared for anything. He traced a finger along the canyon route. These positions give us visibility, but limited mobility. If we're forced to retreat, there aren't many options. Cruz nodded slowly. I'll pack extra ammunition. Outside the briefing room, Martinez and Diaz were already checking equipment lists. Happy birthday, by the way, Diaz said gruffly, handing Ramirez a small package wrapped in newspaper. From all of us. Ramirez unwrapped it to find a vintage compass with his initials engraved on the back. This is for when the GPS fails, Martinez explained. Old school, but reliable. Ramirez was touched. Despite the danger of their profession, or perhaps because of it, the unit had become family. Thanks, guys. Let's hope I won't need it anytime soon. Martinez clapped him on the shoulder. Drinks on me when this operation's over, assuming we don't end up in a shootout with cartel commandos. Don't even joke about that, Cruz muttered. At his desk, Ramirez opened his locker and placed the compass. Inside, his gaze lingered on the photo taped to the door. Himself and his sister Ilana at her college graduation 2 years ago. Since his parents' death in a car accident when he was 19, Ilana was his only family. She worried about him constantly, especially since taking the border patrol position. He pulled out his phone and saw 3 missed calls from her. Probably birthday wishes. He'd call her back later, after finalizing the operation details. No sense worrying her with what they were about to face. The rest of the day passed in methodical preparation. Weapons were cleaned and checked. Communications protocols established. Terrain maps studied until every agent could visualize the canyon system with their eyes closed. It was nearly midnight when Ramirez finally headed to the barracks for a few hours of sleep before their pre-dawn deployment. As he lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, his phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. Sangre Nueva knows. Trap set for border patrol at Diamondback. Stay away. Ramirez sat bolt upright, heart racing. He immediately called Hernandez, who answered on the first ring. Sir, I just received an anonymous warning about the operation. Possible leak. Get to the command center, Hernandez ordered. We've received similar messages. Warren's already on his way back. 20 minutes later, the tactical team reassembled, faces grim in the harsh fluorescent light. Warren paced the room, furious. 3 different agents received warnings from untraceable numbers. Either we have a well-meaning informant, or someone's trying to scare us off. Or both, Ramirez suggested. What if Sangre Nueva is deliberately feeding us contradictory information? First, they leak their route, knowing we'll set up patrols. Then they send warnings, hoping we'll abort. While they move their shipment through a completely different corridor, Cruz finished his thought. Hernandez studied the map. So what's the play? abort Diamondback and redirect to other corridors. That's exactly what they'd want, Warren said. No, we proceed as planned, but with enhanced awareness that we could be walking into a trap. And the Marine backup? Martinez asked. Still on standby, but we've expanded their operational radius to cover secondary corridors as well. As the others discussed contingency plans, Ramirez stepped outside for air. The desert night was cool and clear, stars brilliant against the infinite blackness. He pulled out his phone and called his sister. Miguel? Alana answered, voice thick with sleep. It's 1 a.m. Is everything okay? Yeah, just working late. Sorry I missed your calls earlier. I was just calling to wish you happy birthday. 34, getting ancient. He smiled, despite his tension. Thanks for remembering. Everything. Okay? You sound stressed. Just a complicated case. He paused, suddenly wanting to tell her everything about the operation, his concerns, the warnings. Instead he said, How are your medical school applications going? Submitted to 12 schools last week. Now the endless waiting begins. You're changing the subject. Professional hazard. Listen, I might be off-grid for a few days. Operation. Stuff. Don't worry if you can't reach me. A long silence. Be careful, Miguel. You're all I've got left. Always am. I'll call you when I'm back. Love you. Love you too. And Miguel? Trust your instincts. You've always had good ones. After hanging up, Ramirez rejoined the others. Final preparations continued through the night. Additional equipment was requisitioned. Communication redundancies established. By dawn, 5 Border Patrol units were ready to deploy to Diamondback Canyon. As they loaded into vehicles, Ramirez caught Warren watching him. Something on your mind, Agent Ramirez? The FBI man asked. Just wondering what makes this shipment worth risking a direct confrontation with U.S. law enforcement. Vega must know it's a line you don't uncross. Warren's expression darkened. That's what worries us most. Whatever they're moving must be worth the escalation. Or maybe that is the point, Ramirez suggested. Maybe the confrontation itself is the objective. Meaning cartels operate on reputation as much as profit. If Sangre Nueva can say they directly engaged Border Patrol and won, their status rises overnight, both with rivals and with potential recruits. Warren considered this. All the more reason to make sure they don't succeed. As the sun crested the eastern mountains, bathing the desert in golden light, the Border Patrol convoy departed. Martinez drove their vehicle, unusually quiet as they passed through the station gates. Having second thoughts? Ramirez asked. Nah, just thinking about my dad. He patrolled these same canyons 20 years ago. Said you could always tell when something bad was coming. The desert gets too quiet, like it's holding its breath. Cruz leaned forward from the back seat. And is it? Holding its breath? Martinez adjusted his mirror, eyes scanning the horizon. Let's hope not. But just in case. He patted the extra ammunition boxes by his feet. I came prepared for Armageddon. Ramirez checked his sidearm one final time, then the compass his teammates had given him. The needle swung steadily north, toward Diamondback Canyon and whatever awaited them there. Whether trap or triumph, they would face it together. In the distance, dust swirled into small devils that danced across the terrain, nature's warning of disturbances to come. The desert knew what was coming. Soon, they would too. The Border Patrol vehicles arrived at Diamondback Canyon just after 0800 hours. The morning heat was already building, promising another scorching day in the desert borderlands. Ramirez's team took position at the southern entrance, a narrow passage flanked by rust-colored rock formations that rose like ancient sentinels against the azure sky. Alpha team in position, Ramirez reported through his radio. Static crackled before Diaz's voice responded from the command position. Copy Alpha. Bravo and Charlie teams also in position. Satellite imagery shows no unusual activity. First drone sweep commencing in 5. Ramirez surveyed their surroundings through binoculars. The canyon opened before them, a maze of narrow passages and sudden widenings sculpted by millennia of flash floods. Perfect terrain for an ambush, or for slipping past border defenses undetected. I've got a bad feeling, Martinez muttered, adjusting his tactical vest. It's too quiet. Cruz scanned the ridgeline through her rifle scope. That's because normal. People don't hang out in canyons when it's 100 degrees. No birds, Martinez continued. No lizards, like they know something's coming. Ramirez didn't dismiss his concern. Animals often sense danger before humans. Stay sharp. Drone should give. With eyes on any approach. Their position was defensible. 2 patrol vehicles parked in a V formation near a rock outcropping that provided natural cover. They had visibility for about half a mile up the canyon before it curved sharply eastward. The radio squawked again. All teams, Drone 1 reports negative activity in sectors 1 through 4. Beginning thermal scan of Sector 5 now. Ramirez checked his watch. 3 hours on station with nothing to show for it. Maybe the intelligence was wrong. Maybe Vega had chosen another route. Or maybe a sharp ping from Martinez's tablet interrupted his thoughts. Got something, Martinez said, eyes narrowing at the screen. Drone picked up a heat signature 2 clicks, north of Charlie position. Single vehicle, moving slowly. Cruz moved beside him to look. Coyote with migrants. Too fast for foot crossing, too slow for a smuggling run, Martinez replied. And it's following an unusual path, keeping to the most covered areas. Ramirez radioed the information to Diaz, requesting permission to investigate with Drone 2. Negative, Alpha, came the immediate response. Maintain position. Charlie team is redirecting to intercept. Copy that. Ramirez frowned. Protocol dictated they hold positions, but splitting their already thin forces felt wrong. 40 minutes passed with sporadic updates from Charlie team as they navigated toward the contact. The desert heat intensified, creating heat mirages that danced along the canyon floor. Ramirez wiped sweat from his brow and took a swig from his canteen. The water was already warm. The radio crackled urgently. All teams, be advised. Drone 1 has lost contact with Charlie team. Last transmission indicated they were investigating an abandoned vehicle. No distress call received. Ramirez exchanged glances with Cruz and Martinez. 3 experienced agents going silent simultaneously wasn't a coincidence. Sir, requesting permission to... A deafening explosion cut him off, echoing through the canyon. In the distance, a plume of black smoke rose above the ridge where Charlie team had been headed. All teams, we have an explosive device detonated near Charlie's last position. Diaz's voice was tight with controlled panic. Bravo team, converge on that location. Alpha, maintain position in case this is a diversion. Martinez slammed his fist against the vehicle door. It's a trap. They took out Charlie first because they were closest to whatever Vega's moving. Or to draw the rest of us in, Cruz added, grimly. Ramirez's mind raced. If this was indeed Sangre Nueva's work, they wouldn't stop with eliminating one team. The ambush would be coordinated. Simultaneous strikes to cripple Border Patrol response before they could call for backup. His instincts screamed danger just as the radio erupted with Bravo team's frantic transmission. Taking fire, heavy automatic weapons from the ridge. We're pinned down and... The transmission dissolved into gunfire before cutting off completely. Alpha team, return to base immediately, Diaz ordered. Repeat, abort mission, and the unmistakable sound of gunfire echoed from Diaz's position, followed by silence. Delta position, respond, Ramirez shouted into his radio. Nothing but static answered him. In the space of 2 minutes, 3 of their 5 positions had gone dark. Whatever Sangre Nueva had planned, it was happening now. Start the engines, Ramirez commanded. We're getting out of here and calling in the Marines from a safe distance. But before Martinez could turn the key, a metallic ping sounded from above. All 3 agents looked up just as a small cylindrical object bounced off their hood and rolled beneath the vehicle. Grenade! Cruz shouted. They dove for cover behind the rock outcropping, just as the explosion tore through their primary vehicle, flipping it onto its side in a shower of metal and glass. The shockwaves slammed Ramirez against the rocks, his ears ringing from the concussive force. Disoriented, he struggled to his feet, drawing his sidearm. Through the smoke and dust, he saw Martinez pulling Cruz to cover, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead. Their second vehicle was still intact, 20 yards away. Move to the backup vehicle, Ramirez shouted, though he could barely hear his own voice through the ringing. As they broke cover, gunfire erupted from multiple positions along the ridgeline. Bullets kicked up dust to their feet and pinged off rocks around them. They weren't just being attacked. They were being hunted. Martinez reached the vehicle first, sliding behind the wheel as Cruz dove into the back seat. Ramirez provided covering fire, emptying half his magazine toward the muzzle flashes on the ridge before jumping into the passenger seat. Go, 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 he yelled as bullets shattered the rear window. Martinez floored the accelerator and the vehicle lurched forward, fishtailing on the loose gravel before finding traction. They sped down the canyon, away from the ambush point, bullets still pinging off their rear bumper. "Anyone hit?" Ramirez asked, checking himself for wounds. His left arm was bleeding from flying shrapnel, but the injury seemed superficial. "I'm good," Martinez responded, knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Cruz?" "Concussed but functional," she said, pressing a field dressing to her forehead. "Radio's dead. Cell signal too. They're jamming communications," Ramirez realized. "We need to get clear of the canyon to call for backup." A deafening crack split the air, and their front tire exploded. Martinez fought for control as the vehicle skidded sideways, eventually coming to rest against the canyon wall. "Sniper!" Cruz hissed, scanning the ridgeline. "And a good one." Another shot struck near the engine block, sending steam hissing into the air. The vehicle was disabled. "Out! Everyone out!" Ramirez ordered. They grabbed go bags with extra ammunition and scrambled from the vehicle, taking cover behind a fallen boulder. The canyon had widened slightly, giving them more room to maneuver, but also making them more visible to the shooters above. Gunfire continued sporadically, not trying to hit them directly, but keeping them pinned down. "They don't want us dead yet," Martinez observed, checking his rifle. "They're herding us." Ramirez nodded grimly. "Toward a kill zone, most likely." He assessed their situation. 3 agents with limited ammunition, no communications, at least 5 cartel gunmen on the high ground, and potentially more closing in. "Options?" Cruz asked, professional calm belying the desperation of their situation. "We don't have the firepower to fight our way out," Ramirez said. "And they control the high ground. We need to find defensible cover and hold out until help arrives." "If it arrives," Martinez added. "They hit all 5 positions simultaneously. For all we know, we're the only ones left." Ramirez refused to consider that possibility. "Standard protocol. When a team misses 2 consecutive check-ins, Fort Huachuca dispatches the QRF. Marines should be en route already. That's assuming the jamming isn't affecting Fort Huachuca's communications too," Cruz pointed out. A fresh volley of gunfire interrupted their discussion, closer this time. Through his binoculars, Ramirez spotted movement at the canyon entrance, men, in tactical gear advancing methodically, using the terrain for cover. "They're coming in behind us," he warned. "At least 8 hostiles. We need to move now." They retreated deeper into the canyon, staying low and using the uneven terrain to break line of sight with their pursuers. After 500 yards, they found what they were looking for. A defensible position where the canyon narrowed, with a small cave-like indentation in the rock wall that offered cover from 3 sides. "Here," Ramirez ordered. "Set up defensive positions. Martinez, how much ammo do we have?" They pooled their resources. 2 rifles with 47 rounds between them, 3 sidearms with a total of 28 rounds, and a single flashbang grenade from Cruz's go bag. "Not enough for a sustained firefight," Cruz said, stating the obvious. Ramirez checked his watch. 15 minutes since the initial explosion. If the Marines were dispatched immediately after they missed their check-in, they were still at least 20 minutes out. "We don't need to win," he said. "We just need to survive long enough for backup to arrive." Martinez positioned himself at their right flank, rifle trained on the approach. "They're spreading out," he reported. 3 on the ridge above, the rest advancing on foot. They know we're cornered. Ramirez felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. This wasn't a random encounter or even an opportunistic ambush. This was a carefully planned operation specifically targeting Border Patrol. The cartel had known exactly where they would be and came prepared to eliminate them. "Listen to me," he said to Cruz and Martinez. "Whatever happens, one of us needs to survive to report this. Vega isn't just making a statement, he's starting a war." Cruz checked her weapon. "Then let's make sure it's a war he regrets beginning." In the distance, a man's voice called out in Spanish, amplified by a megaphone. "Atención, Border Patrol, you're surrounded. Lay down your weapons and you will not be harmed." Martinez snorted. "Yeah, right." The voice continued. "This territory now belongs to Sangre Nueva. The US government has abandoned you. No help is coming." Ramirez raised his rifle, sighting a figure moving between rocks 80 yards away. "Save your ammunition," he instructed. The others, "Don't fire unless you have a clear shot." The standoff continued for several tense minutes. The cartel forces were in no rush, content to keep the agents spinned down while they maneuvered into optimum firing positions. It was a hunter's strategy, patient, methodical, lethal. Then, faintly in the distance, came the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors. "You hear that?" Cruz whispered, hope flickering across her face. Ramirez nodded, relief washing through him. "Marines!" He checked his watch. They were ahead of schedule. The quick reaction force must have already been airborne. When the attack began, the cartel heard it too. Their movements became more urgent, voices calling out to each other as they prepared for a final push. "They're going to rush us before the helicopters arrive," Ramirez warned. "Get ready." The attack came moments later. Coordinated fire from multiple positions, forcing the agents to keep their heads down as figures darted forward through the hail of bullets. Ramirez fired carefully, dropping one attacker, then another. Martinez's rifle cracked steadily from the right flank, and Cruz maintained a steady rate of fire to their left. But for every cartel gunman they hit, 2 more appeared. They were being overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower. A bullet grazed Ramirez's shoulder, spinning him backward. Another struck Martinez in the leg, drawing a pained curse from the agent. Cruz's rifle clicked empty, forcing her to switch to her sidearm. "Last magazine!" Martinez called out, voice tight with pain as he reloaded. The helicopter sounds grew louder, but Ramirez knew they wouldn't arrive in time. The cartel forces were now within 30 yards, preparing for their final assault. Then, in a moment that would be seared into Ramirez's memory forever, salvation arrived from an unexpected direction. A single, sharp crack echoed across the canyon, different from the AK-47s the cartel was using. A higher, cleaner sound. One of the advancing cartel members dropped suddenly, a precision shot through his center mass. Then another fell, and another. The radio in Ramirez's vest crackled to life, breaking through the jamming. "Border Patrol team, this is Stalker Actual. Marine Scout snipers on Overwatch. Keep your heads down. We've got the high ground now." 9 minutes to decide who owned the canyon. The clock had started ticking. Staff Sergeant Jackson Cole had been watching the ambush unfold for 7 minutes through his scope. Alongside him, Corporal Chen calculated distance, wind, and elevation, feeding him targeting data with mechanical precision. 200 yards to their left, Lance Corporals Miller and Rodriguez maintained overwatch on the eastern approach. "Border Patrol team taking heavy fire," Cole reported through his comlink. "Multiple hostiles advancing on their position." "Roger that, Stalker 1, came the response from Major Reynolds in the approaching helicopter. "You are cleared to engage. Protect those agents." Cole didn't need to be told twice. He'd spent 3 tours in Afghanistan before joining the Marine Scout Sniper program. He knew what happened when good people were abandoned to superior forces. "Chen, prioritize targets with crew-served weapons first, then anyone in a command position." "Roger that. First target identified. Male with radio equipment. Range 683 meters. Wind steady at 4 knots right to left." Cole made his adjustments. Inhaled deeply, and on the exhaled breath, squeezed the trigger. Through his scope, he watched the target drop. Without pausing, he shifted to the next threat. Second target acquired. Range 712 meters. Another shot, another hit. The cartel forces, suddenly finding themselves under precision fire from an unseen position, scattered for cover. Their coordinated advance faltered as confusion spread through their ranks. "Targets are seeking cover, becoming less visible," Chen reported. "Switch to targets still engaging the Border Patrol position," Cole ordered. 3 more shots, 3 more hits. The cartel's attack wavered further, their fire becoming sporadic as they tried to locate the source of the deadly accurate shots raining down upon them. "This is Stalker Actual to Border Patrol team," Cole transmitted. "We count 15 hostiles in your immediate vicinity, with more possibly in concealed positions. We've neutralized 5. Hold position until extraction arrives." In their defensive position below, Ramirez felt a surge of hope as the cartel forces retreated from the precision fire coming from the ridgeline. He keyed his radio. "Stalker Actual, this is Agent Ramirez. We have 3 agents, 1 wounded. What's your status?" 4-man. Sniper team in Overwatch position. Blackhawk with QRF 8 minutes out. We'll keep the hostiles suppressed until they arrive." Martinez grimaced as Cruz tightened a field dressing around his leg wound. 8 minutes is a long time when you're bleeding out in cartel territory. "You've lost a little blood, not your sense of humor." "You'll live," Cruz replied, though her expression betrayed concern. Ramirez surveyed their situation. The Marine snipers had given them breathing room, but the cartel still held numerical superiority. And Vega, assuming he was coordinating this attack, wouldn't retreat just because theods had shifted slightly. They'll adapt, he warned. Vega was special forces. He'll figure out where the sniper fire is coming from and try to neutralize it or find an approach that keeps his men protected. As if confirming his assessment, the cartel forces began a new pattern of movement, staying in defilated positions that shielded them from the sniper's line of sight while still allowing them to close distance on the border patrol position. They're flanking east, Cruz observed, using the rock formations for cover from the snipers. Ramirez nodded grimly. And once they get close enough, the snipers won't have clear shots without risking hitting us. He keyed his radio again. Stalker actual, be advised hostiles are using terrain to mask movement from your position. They're approaching from our eastern flank, approximately 100 meters and closing. Copy that, came Cole's steady reply. We've dispatched Lance Corporals Miller and Rodriguez to reposition for better coverage of your eastern flank. Hold tight. Martinez checked his ammunition again, a nervous habit that Ramirez recognized from previous operations. 10 rounds left. Make 'em count. Ramirez distributed his remaining ammunition, ensuring each agent had roughly equal firepower. If they rush us, aim for center mass, no heroics. The cartel forces were adapting quickly, communicating with hand signals as they leapfrogged between cover. These weren't common smugglers. Their tactical discipline spoke of military training. A sudden burst of automatic fire forced the agents lower behind their cover. 3 cartel gunmen had worked their way to a position just 70 yards east, partially sheltered from the sniper's view by a rock outcropping. They've got us pinned, Cruz shouted over the gunfire. Snipers can't get a clean shot from their position. Ramirez made a split-second decision. Cover me! Before the others could object, he rolled to the edge of their cover and fired 3 rapid shots at the nearest attacker, forcing him back. In the momentary lull, Ramirez sprinted to a boulder 10 yards closer to the threat, drawing fire away from Cruz and Martinez. The maneuver worked. From his new angle, he could see the cartel gunman more clearly. He fired twice, hitting one in the shoulder. The man dropped his weapon, scrambling backward. A single crack echoed from the ridge, and another cartel member fell. The Marines had adjusted their position. Agent Ramirez, what part of hold position was unclear? Cole's voice came through his radio, though Ramirez detected a hint of respect beneath the reprimand. Creating a crossfire, Ramirez responded, ducking as bullets chipped away at his cover. They were about to flank us. Roger that. Be advised. Blackhawk ETA, 5 minutes. QRF deploying directly to your position, 5 minutes. They could hold out that long. Then Martinez's voice came through his earpiece, tense and urgent. Contact rear. 3 hostiles. Ramirez whipped around to see 3 cartel gunmen who had somehow circled behind their position, approaching Cruz and Martinez from the west. They'd split their forces, attacking from multiple angles simultaneously. Before he could react, Cruz moved with startling speed. She grabbed the flashbang grenade from her vest, pulled the pin, and hurled it toward the approaching hostiles. The disorienting blast bought her enough time to squeeze off 4 shots, dropping one attacker and forcing the others to retreat. But the coordinated assault had achieved its purpose. The Border Patrol agents were now separated, their defensive position compromised. Fall back to the original position, Ramirez called out, preparing to make a run back to Cruz and Martinez. As he tensed to move, a bullet struck the ground inches from his boot. He froze, realizing it hadn't come from the cartel forces. The angle was wrong. He looked up toward the ridge where the Marine snipers were positioned. His radio crackled. Stay put, Agent Ramirez. Trust me. Trusting a sniper he'd never met went against every instinct, but Ramirez forced himself to remain still. Seconds later, he understood why. From his vantage point, he could see what Cruz and Martinez couldn't. A cartel fighter had worked his way onto a ledge 30 feet above their position, preparing to drop a grenade. Before the man could pull the pin, a single shot from the Marine sniper struck him in the chest. He toppled from the ledge, the unexploded grenade falling harmlessly. Away from the agents! Thanks for the trust, Cole's voice came through again. Now move your ass back to your team while I've got you covered. Ramirez didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted back to Cruz and Martinez, diving behind cover as bullets kicked up dust at his heels. Don't ever do that again, Cruz scolded though. Her eyes showed relief as she helped him into cover. No promises, Ramirez replied, catching his breath. Blackhawks 5 minutes out, Martinez winced as he shifted position to get a better firing angle. 5 minutes is a long time in a firefight. Then let's make it count, Ramirez said. reloading his weapon with his remaining ammunition. I didn't come all this way to die. In a canyon on my birthday. The distinctive thump of helicopter rotors grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls. The approaching Black Hawk should have been a source of pure relief. But Ramirez felt his unease growing. The cartel forces weren't retreating despite the Marine sniper fire and the approaching reinforcements. Instead, they were regrouping, maintaining pressure from multiple angles. Something's not right, he muttered. They should be pulling back. Cruz nodded, having reached the same conclusion. Unless they've got something that can take down a helicopter. The implication hit Ramirez like a physical blow. He grabbed his radio. Stalker actual, be advised we... Suspect hostiles may have anti-aircraft capabilities. Warn the incoming Black Hawk. Already on it, Cole responded. We spotted a team moving what looks like a shoulder-fired missile system into position. Black Hawk is being rerouted to a secondary LZ 2 clicks south, Martinez swore under his breath. So instead of extraction in 5 minutes, we get to fight our way 2 kilometers through cartel-controlled terrain. Better than watching our ride. Get shot down, Cruz pointed out. The radio crackled again, this time with Major Reynolds' voice from the Black Hawk. Border Patrol team, this is Thunder Actual. We're deploying the QRF to secure the secondary LZ. Stalker team will guide you to position once the route is clear. Hold tight. Ramirez acknowledged the transmission, then turned to his team. We need to conserve ammunition. Fire only when you've got a guaranteed hit. The cartel seemed to sense the change in plans. Their fire intensified, no longer aimed at killing the agents outright, but at keeping them pinned while additional forces moved into position. Through his binoculars, Ramirez spotted new movement at the canyon entrance. A vehicle approaching, different from the tactical trucks the cartel had been using. This one was a black SUV with tinted windows, moving deliberately toward the center of the confrontation. Got a VIP arrival, he informed the others. Could be Vega. Cole's voice came through immediately. Confirmed, we have eyes on what appears to be a command vehicle, requesting permission to engage. A pause, then Major Reynolds responded. Negative, Stalker 1. Hold fire on the vehicle. Intelligence wants positive ID on high-value targets, if possible. Ramirez understood the hesitation. Confirmation of Vega's presence would elevate this from a border skirmish to an international incident involving the direct targeting of U.S. law enforcement by cartel leadership. That kind of evidence would justify a much broader response. The black SUV stopped 300 yards from their position. A tall figure emerged from the passenger side, dressed in black tactical gear, but noticeably lacking the face coverings the other cartel members wore. Even from this distance, Ramirez could make out the distinctive scar running from eye to jaw that Warren had shown them in the briefing. That's him, Ramirez confirmed over the radio. Alejandro Vega in the open. Cole's response was immediate. I have a clear shot. Again, Reynolds overruled. Negative, Stalker 1. We need him alive if possible. Intelligence priorities. Ramirez could almost feel Cole's frustration through the radio silence that followed. The sniper was watching cartel forces that had killed Border Patrol agents and now had a clean shot at their leader, but was being held back by strategic considerations. Vegas seemed to know he was being watched. He stood confidently in the open, surveying the battlefield before gesturing to his men. Immediately, their tactics shifted. Instead of trying to advance, they began setting up sustained fire positions, digging in rather than pushing forward. They're not trying to kill us anymore, Cruz realized aloud. They're containing us. Martinez nodded grimly. They know reinforcements are coming, so they're switching to a delaying action. But why? Ramirez wondered. What's worth all this? The answer came moments later when another vehicle appeared behind Vega's SUV, a nondescript panel van with no windows in the cargo area. 4 heavily armed men surrounded it as the rear doors opened. Ramirez strained to see through his binoculars. What emerged from the van made his blood run cold. 2 cartel members were escorting a man in civilian clothes, his hands bound behind his back, a hood covering his head. Behind him, another captive was led out, smaller, possibly a teenager or a woman. They've got hostages, he reported urgently. 2 civilians being moved from a van. Confirmed, Cole responded. We see them. No clear shots without risking the hostages. Vega approached the captives, removed the hood from the first one, a middle-aged man who squinted in the bright sunlight, and appeared to speak to him briefly before replacing the hood. Then he looked directly toward the ridge where the Marine snipers were positioned and made a slashing gesture across his throat. The message was clear. Intervene further, and the hostages die. That complicates things, Martinez understated, watching, through his own field glasses. Ramirez's mind raced. Hostages changed everything. The Marines couldn't risk a direct assault with civilians in the crossfire, and the cartel knew it. "Major Reynolds, are you seeing this?" he radioed. "Affirmative," came the tense reply. "We're reassessing our options." Those options seemed increasingly limited. With hostages in play, the cartel had effectively neutralized the advantage the Marine snipers provided. Any misstep could result in civilian casualties. Then, Vega did something unexpected. He picked up a radio, not a short-range tactical unit, but what looked like a satellite phone, and appeared to be making a call while looking directly toward Ramirez's position. Seconds later, Ramirez's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, surprised to find a signal despite the earlier jamming. "Unknown number," he told the others as he cautiously answered. "Ramirez." "Agent Ramirez," a smooth, accented voice responded. "I believe we find ourselves at an impasse." Ramirez put the phone on speaker so Cruz and Martinez could hear. "Alejandro Vega, I presume." A soft chuckle came through the line. "Your reputation precedes you. The agent who single-handedly tracked down the Nogales trafficking ring. I've been looking forward to meeting you." "Can't say the same," Ramirez replied evenly. "Murdering border patrol agents isn't the best introduction." "A regrettable necessity," Vega's voice hardened. "Your government should know better than to interfere in our territory." "This is United States soil," Ramirez countered. "And those hostages are civilians." "Ah, yes, our guests." Vega's tone turned conversational again. "Dr. Hitmen is a leading expert in biological weapons development. His daughter has joined us to ensure his cooperation. They're quite valuable to certain interested parties." Ramirez exchanged alarmed glances with Cruz and Martinez. This wasn't about drugs or territorial dominance. It was something far more dangerous. "Let them go, Vega. Whatever you're being paid, it's not worth an international incident." "On the contrary," Vega replied. "The price is quite satisfactory. Now here is what will happen. Your Marine friends will withdraw. The helicopters will leave. You and your fellow agents will surrender your weapons. Once we are safely across the border, the hostages will be released unharmed. And if we refuse, then Dr. Hitmen will watch his daughter die before joining her." Vega's voice was chillingly matter-of-fact. "You have 10 minutes to comply. I'll be watching." The line went dead. "He's bluffing," Martinez said immediately. "Once we surrender, they'll kill all of us, including the hostages." "Agreed," Cruz nodded. "They can't leave witnesses to a bioweapons transfer." Ramirez relayed the conversation to Major Reynolds and Staff Sergeant Cole, adding his own assessment. "Vega's not leaving without those hostages, and he's not letting us live to talk about it. We need options." Reynolds' response was grim. "Command is scrambling additional assets, but nothing will arrive in 10 minutes. We need to buy time." "Sir," Cole interjected, "me and Chen have a potential solution, but it's high risk. We've identified a narrow ravine east of the hostage position. If Agent Ramirez can create a distraction, we believe we can infiltrate to within extraction range of the hostages without being detected." "What kind of distraction?" Ramirez asked. "The kind that makes Vega think he's winning," Cole replied. "You need to initiate surrender negotiations. Keep him talking while we maneuver." Ramirez considered the plan. It was dangerous. If the Marine snipers were spotted approaching the hostages, Vega wouldn't hesitate to execute them. But the alternative was waiting for the deadline to expire. "I'll make the call," he decided. "But we'll need perfect timing and a signal to coordinate." "Watch for a green flare," Reynolds said. "When you see it, create maximum chaos. The QRF will hit them from the south simultaneously." Ramirez looked at Cruz and Martinez. "Are you with me?" Martinez checked his bandaged leg, then gave a tight nod. "Not like I've got dinner plans." Cruz simply chambered a round in her pistol. "Let's show them who owns this canyon." Ramirez dialed the number that had called him, watching through his binoculars as Vega answered his satellite phone 300 yards away. "Vega, this is Ramirez. We need to discuss terms." "There are no terms to discuss, Agent Ramirez. Only compliance or consequences." Ramirez forced his voice to sound desperate, a man seeking compromise. "Look, I've got a wounded agent here. I'm responsible for my team. I need assurances. The only assurance I offer is that immediate compliance means you live a few hours longer than resistance." Vega's confidence was absolute. 7 minutes remaining. "We need more time," Ramirez insisted. My team leader is communicating with a command. They want proof. The hostages are alive before we stand down. There was a pause. Then Vega spoke again, his tone calculating. Very well. As a gesture of good faith. Through his binoculars, Ramirez watched as Vega motioned to his men. They removed the hoods from both captives. Dr. Whitman was a thin man in his 50s with disheveled grey hair. Beside him, his daughter appeared to be in her early 20s, her face tear-streaked but defiant. Satisfied? Vega asked. I need to speak with them. A longer pause this time. Ramirez held his breath, hoping he hadn't pushed too far. Finally, Vega responded. You test my patience, Agent Ramirez, but very well. Vega approached Dr. Whitman and held the phone to his ear. Ramirez heard ragged breathing, then a cultured voice speaking quickly. This is Dr. Andrew Whitman. They're forcing us to... The phone was yanked away before he could finish. A moment later, a younger female voice came through. Whoever you are, don't trust them. They want my father's research on... Again, the phone was pulled away. Vega's voice returned, harder now. There's your proof of life. Now, Agent Ramirez, let me be perfectly clear. You will lay down your weapons and walk out with your hands raised in exactly 5 minutes. Or the girl dies first. No more delays. Ramirez needed to keep him talking. We'll comply, but I need to know my team will be treated according to international law. We're federal agents, not combatants. Vega laughed. You still don't understand the situation, do you? There will be no record of this encounter. No witnesses. The official report will state that you and your team were killed by unknown smugglers, a tragic loss in the line of duty. Then why should we surrender at all? Ramirez countered. If we're dead either way, we might as well take as many of you with us as we can. Because, Agent Ramirez, there's quick and painless, and then there's slow and agonizing. The girl would suffer tremendously before the end. Do you want that on your conscience? Out of the corner of his eye, Ramirez spotted movement along the eastern ravine. Cole and Chen were on the move, using the contours of the land to approach unseen. He needed to keep Vega's attention focused on him. I want to speak to your employer, Ramirez demanded suddenly. Whoever is paying you for the bioweapons research. That got Vega's attention. Through the binoculars, Ramirez saw him stiffen slightly. You're in no position to make demands. I'm in exactly the right position, Ramirez pressed. You think this ends today? The moment Dr. Whitman and those bioweapons cross the border, you become an international terrorist. Every intelligence agency on the planet will hunt you down, but I can offer an alternative. I'm listening, Vega said after a pause, curiosity evident in his voice. Ramirez hadn't expected to get this far. He improvised rapidly. Full immunity, for you and your men. Turn over Dr. Whitman, his daughter, and the research to us. In exchange, you walk away. Not just from this canyon, but from the terrorist watch list. New identity, new start. It was a complete bluff. Ramirez had no authority to make such an offer, but it only needed to sound plausible enough to keep Vega talking. A tempting fantasy, Vega replied. But I prefer the certainty of cash in hand to promises from desperate men. While they spoke, Cole and Chen had covered half the distance to the hostages. The Marines moved like ghosts, invisible to the cartel sentries scanning the ridgelines for snipers. 3 minutes, Agent Ramirez. I suggest you start walking toward us now, weapons left behind. Ramirez checked his watch. The Marine QRF should be in position by now, waiting for the green flare. He needed just a little more time. We're coming. Out, he said into the phone. But my partner's wounded. We need a stretcher. Use your tactical vest as a drag sheet, Vega ordered impatiently. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Through his scope, Ramirez could see Cole and Chen now positioned just 70 meters from the hostages, concealed behind a rock formation. They were setting up for their move. Any second now, the green flare would signal the start of the assault. Vega, before we surrender, I want your word that... A brilliant emerald light burst in the sky to the south, cutting him off mid-sentence. The green flare arced high above the canyon, momentarily drawing all eyes upward. Now! Ramirez shouted to Cruz and Martinez. Open fire! All 3 agents emerged from cover simultaneously, firing at the cartel positions with their remaining ammunition. The sudden attack caught the Sicarios off guard, forcing them to duck for cover. In the same instant, Cole and Chen broke from concealment, sprinting toward the hostages. The Marine QRF surged from the southern canyon entrance, laying down suppressive fire as they advanced. Through his binoculars, Ramirez saw Vega shouting orders, trying to regain control of the situation. 2 cartel gunmen moved toward the hostages, weapons raised, but they never made it. Cole and Chen dropped them with synchronized shots before reaching Dr. Whitman and his daughter. The tide had turned. With precision fire from the ridge, the Marine ground force advancing from the south, and Ramirez's team keeping the central cartel force pinned down, chaos reigned across the battlefield. But Vega wasn't finished. As Cole cut the hostages' restraints, the cartel leader drew his gold-plated pistol and charged toward them, using the confusion as cover. "Vega's going for the hostages," Ramirez shouted into his radio, but the channel was overwhelmed with tactical communications. In that moment, Ramirez made his decision. He'd started this fight. He would finish it. "Cover me!" he yelled to Cruz and Martinez, then broke from their position, sprinting directly toward Vega. Ramirez sprinted across open ground, his focus narrowed to a single point. Vega moving toward the hostages. Bullets kicked up dust around him, but none found their mark. The chaos of the battlefield provided its own kind of cover, as cartel forces scrambled to respond to attacks from multiple directions. Cole saw Ramirez coming and shouted something to Chen, who immediately positioned himself between the hostages and the approaching threat. Dr. Whitman and his daughter crouched behind a boulder, the Marine sniper standing guard over them. Vega reached the hostages just seconds before Ramirez arrived. The cartel leader grabbed Dr. Whitman's daughter by the hair, yanking her to her feet as he raised his pistol. "Stop!" Dr. Whitman screamed, lunging forward only to be restrained by Chen. "I'll go with you, just don't hurt her!" Vega's scarred face twisted in a cold smile. "You were never leaving this canyon, Doctor. But your research will." Time slowed for Ramirez as he closed the final distance. Vega was turning, the gold-plated pistol shifting toward the young woman's head. 20 feet, 15, 10. Ramirez launched himself in a flying tackle, slamming into Vega's midsection just as the pistol discharged. The bullet went wide, and both men crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs and dust. Vega was strong, stronger than Ramirez had anticipated. The cartel leader twisted with serpentine agility, breaking free of Ramirez's grasp and scrambling to his feet. Before Ramirez could rise, Vega's boot connected with his ribs, driving the air from his lungs. "You are persistent, Agent Ramirez," Vega hissed, aiming his pistol. "But persistence won't save you." A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Vega's weapon. Cole had fired from 30 yards away, the bullet grazing Vega's shoulder. The cartel leader staggered, momentarily distracted. It was all the opening Ramirez needed. He swept Vega's legs from beneath him and lunged for the dropped pistol. Their hands reached it simultaneously, grappling for control as the weapon discharged again, the bullet burrowing harmlessly into the ground beside them. They rolled across the rocky terrain, neither able to gain a decisive advantage. Vega fought, with the calculated precision of a trained killer, while Ramirez channeled the desperate energy of a man protecting innocent lives. "You're fighting for the wrong side," Vega growled, blood from his wounded shoulder staining his tactical vest. "Your government abandoned you, left you to die. Yet here I am," Ramirez shot back, driving an elbow into Vega's wounded shoulder. The cartel leader howled in pain, his grip on the pistol loosening just enough for Ramirez to wrench it away. Ramirez rolled clear, coming up in a shooter's stance with Vega's own weapon trained on him. The cartel leader froze, calculating his odds. "It's over, Vega," Ramirez declared, breathing heavily. "Your men are being overrun. The hostages are secure. Surrender now." A curious smile spread across Vega's face. "You think this was about hostages? About territory?" He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You have no idea what's really happening here." "Enlighten me," Ramirez said, keeping the pistol steady despite his exhaustion. "This?" Vega gestured around at the battlefield. "This is a distraction. The real operation concluded 20 minutes ago, 50 miles east of here." A chill ran down Ramirez's spine. "What operation? Ask your FBI friend, Warren." Vega's smile widened. "Oh wait, you can't. He's dead." The revelation hit Ramirez like a physical blow. "You're lying." "Am I? Check your phone. It should have signal now." Vega's confidence was unnerving. The news should be breaking any minute. Keeping the pistol trained on Vega, Ramirez reached for his phone with his free hand. The screen showed multiple missed calls and a string of urgent text messages from Border Patrol headquarters. He opened the most recent one. "Urgent. FBI safe house attacked. Agent Warren and team eliminated. All units on high alert. Ramirez felt his world tilt. Warren dead? How? Why? And if the entire operation at Diamondback Canyon was just a distraction, what was the real target? He demanded, pressing the pistol against Vega's chest. The cartel leader's eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. A shipment, one your government would pay any price to keep secret. Thanks to your heroic stand here in this canyon, drawing all available resources to your rescue, that shipment is now safely across the border. What shipment? Ramirez pressed harder with the pistol. Dead man's switch, Vega replied calmly. Kill me, and certain files go public. Files detailing your government's secret biological research program. Dr. Whitman's research. The very program they claimed they were trying to keep out of our hands. Ramirez's mind raced. Was Vega bluffing, or had they all been pawns in a much larger game? Behind him, he heard footsteps approaching cautiously. Cole's voice came from a few yards away. Agent Ramirez, we need to secure the prisoner. He says Warren is dead, Ramirez replied without taking his eyes off Vega. Says this whole operation was a diversion for something bigger happening east of here. Cole was silent for a moment, then spoke in a carefully neutral tone. Major Reynolds just received confirmation. There was an attack on an FBI safe house near Nogales. Multiple casualties reported, including Special Agent Warren. The confirmation landed like a hammer blow. Ramirez fought to maintain his composure as the implications cascaded through his mind. If Warren was dead, if this entire confrontation had been engineered as a distraction, we've been played, he said quietly. Vega's smile never wavered. Not you specifically, Agent Ramirez. You performed exactly as expected. The dedicated Border Patrol agent, fighting bravely against overwhelming odds. A perfect diversion. Secure him, Ramirez ordered Cole, stepping back. Full restraints, constant supervision. As Marine MPs moved in to take custody of Vega, Ramirez walked over to where Dr. Whitman and his daughter were receiving medical attention. The scientist looked shell-shocked, his daughter clinging to him. A medic checked them for injuries. Dr. Whitman, Ramirez began gently. I need to know what Vega wanted from you. The scientist's eyes darted nervously to his daughter, then back to Ramirez. My research. I've been developing a targeted delivery system for vaccines, aerosol distribution that can cover large areas with minimal dosage. In the wrong hands, it becomes a delivery system for biological weapons, Ramirez finished for him. Whitman nodded miserably. They kidnapped Emma from her apartment 3 days ago. Said they'd torture her if I didn't cooperate. They wanted me to hand over my research and accompany them to a lab in Mexico to implement it. Dad fought back, Emma Whitman interjected. Her voice stronger than her father's, despite the ordeal she'd endured. He sabotaged the data they forced him to give them. That's why they were still keeping us alive. They needed him to fix it. Dr. Whitman looked up at Ramirez. But Vega said something strange just before you arrived. He said it didn't matter anymore, that they'd acquired the original. Cold realization washed over Ramirez. The real shipment. They weren't moving your research out of the country. They were bringing the original research in. That's impossible, Whitman shook his head. The only complete version of my work is stored on secure servers at... He stopped abruptly, face paling. At where, Doctor? Ramirez pressed. At the CDC facility where Warren's safe house was located, he whispered. My God, it was never about me. They already had someone on the inside. They just needed a distraction big enough to cover the extraction. The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. The entire operation, the ambush, the hostages, the standoff, had been elaborately staged to draw attention and resources away from the real target. And it had worked perfectly. Ramirez's radio crackled with Major Reynolds' voice. All units, be advised we have confirmation of a second incident. CDC research facility near Nogales reports breach of security protocols and possible theft of classified materials. Cruz and Martinez approached, having heard the transmission. Cruz's forehead wound had been bandaged, and Martinez leaned on a field. Medic for support, his leg properly dressed. So we were the sideshow, Martinez said grimly. The flashy distraction while the real heist happened elsewhere, and it cost Warren and his team their lives, Ramirez added, the weight of it settling over him like a physical burden. Cole joined their huddle, his sniper rifle slung across his back. Orders just came through. We're to transport Vega to Fort Huachuca for immediate interrogation. Joint task force is being assembled to track the stolen research. He won't talk, Ramirez said with certainty. This was too well planned. He's just one piece of a much larger operation. Maybe, Cole acknowledged. But right now, he's the only piece we've got. As Marine medics prepared the wounded for evacuation and security teams secured the battlefield, Ramirez stood apart, staring at the canyon that had nearly become his tomb. 5 Border Patrol agents had entered Diamondback Canyon this morning. Only 3 would leave. And for what? To become unwitting participants in a deadly sleight of hand. Dr. Hitmen approached hesitantly, his daughter at his side. Agent Ramirez, I need you to understand something. If they successfully integrate my delivery system with weaponized pathogens, thousands could die, possibly millions. Then we'll find them before that happens, Ramirez assured him, with more confidence than he felt. There's something else, Hitmen continued, lowering his voice. My research has a flaw, intentional, a safeguard I built in. If implemented incorrectly, the delivery agent becomes unstable, potentially turning against the user. I never documented this. It was my insurance policy. So they need you, even with the stolen research, Ramirez realized. Hitmen nodded grimly. They'll figure that out soon. And when they do, they'll come for you again, Ramirez finished. We'll need to get you and your daughter into protective custody immediately. As they spoke, Marine technicians were combing through the abandoned cartel vehicles, searching for intelligence. One called out, waving a satellite phone he'd recovered from Vega's SUV. Agent Ramirez, this was just received. Ramirez took the phone and read the text message displayed on the screen. Package secured. Proceeding to secondary location. Phase 2 commences in 48 hours. The message was followed by coordinates, not for a location in Mexico as expected, but a position deep in the Arizona desert. They're not crossing the border, Ramirez said, showing the message to Cole. They're staying on US soil. Makes a sick kind of sense, Cole reasoned. Harder to coordinate an international response. By the time Mexico granted permission for IC joint operations, they'd be long gone. Ramirez stared at the coordinates, memorizing them. Whatever Sangre Nueva was planning, it wasn't over. The battle for Diamondback Canyon had concluded, but the war was just beginning. And despite everything they'd endured, despite the lives lost and the blood spilled, a terrible thought occurred to Ramirez. What if the worst was yet to come? The Black Hawk helicopter thundered over the desert landscape, carrying the wounded back to Fort Huachuca. Ramirez sat across from Martinez, whose leg had been properly stabilized by combat medics. Cruz sat beside him, her eyes closed, but her posture alert, resting, not sleeping. Across the cabin, Dr. Hitmen and his daughter huddled together, both wrapped in thermal blankets, despite the heat. Trauma affected people in strange ways. Sometimes, the cold came from within. What happens now? Martinez asked, raising his voice over the rotor noise. Debrief at Fort Huachuca, Ramirez replied. Then we go after the real target. We. Cruz opened her eyes. Miguel, we're Border Patrol, not counter-terrorism. This is FBI territory now, maybe even military. She was right, of course. Standard protocol would sideline them, classify everything that had happened in the canyon, and hand the investigation to specialized units. But nothing about this situation was standard. We're already involved, Ramirez insisted. We lost friends today, and we have something no one else does. First-hand knowledge of what we're dealing with. Before Cruz could respond, Major Reynolds approached from the cockpit area. The Marine officer's expression was grim. Agent Ramirez, we have a situation developing. Command just informed me that Vega's transport has gone off radar. What do you mean off radar? Ramirez demanded. The convoy transporting him to Fort Huachuca was hit 15 minutes ago. Professional job. All Marine guards neutralized. Vega's gone. The news struck like a physical blow. How is that possible? He was under heavy guard. Reynolds' jaw tightened. Inside help, most likely. The ambush was too precise, too well coordinated. They knew exactly when and where to hit. Inside help. The phrase echoed in Ramirez's mind, connecting to Vega's earlier taunt about a mole in the CDC facility. If Sangre Nueva had infiltrated military transport protocols as well. We have a bigger problem than we realized, he said quietly. Reynolds nodded. Command agrees. That's why I've been instructed to bring you directly to a secure facility for immediate debrief. National security teams are being activated. Which facility? Ramirez asked, suspicion mounting. Reynolds hesitated then. Joint Operations Center at Fort Huachuca. Something clicked in Ramirez's mind, a connection he hadn't made before. Who's running the Operations Center? General Lawrence Harmon, Counter-Bioterrorism Division. Dr. Whitman's head snapped up at the name. Harmon? Did you say Harmon is running? The response? Reynolds looked puzzled. Yes. Do you know him? He was overseeing my project, Whitman said slowly, his face draining of color. He's the only one besides me who knew all the details of the research. Ramirez felt the pieces shifting, again forming a new and more disturbing picture. Doctor, are you saying General Harmon could have been the source of the leak? I don't know, Whitman replied, clearly disturbed by the possibility. But he was adamantly opposed when it suggested building in safeguards. Said it limited the tactical applications of my delivery system. Reynolds looked between them, comprehension dawning. If you're suggesting a general officer is compromised, I'm not suggesting anything yet, Ramirez interrupted. But I am saying we need to be careful about who we trust until we know more. The major considered this, then made a decision. Change of plans. We're diverting to Tucson Air National Guard Base. I know the commander personally. We can secure you there until we sort this out. As Reynolds returned to the cockpit to redirect the pilot, Martinez leaned forward. So now we're running from our own people? This just keeps getting better. Not running, Ramirez corrected. Regrouping. If there's high-level involvement in whatever Sangre Nueva is planning, we need to figure out who we can trust before we make another move. Cruz nodded slowly. And those coordinates from Vega's phone, the secondary location. That's our next stop, Ramirez confirmed. But not through official channels, not until we know who's on which side. The helicopter banked sharply, changing course toward Tucson. As the desert landscape tilted beneath them, Ramirez found himself in the disorienting position of no longer knowing who the enemy was. The clear lines between cartel and law enforcement, between Mexico and the United States, had blurred into a dangerous gray zone where allegiances shifted like the desert sand. One thing remained clear. Whatever biological weapon Sangre Nueva had acquired, they planned to deploy it soon. And somehow, Ramirez, Cruz, and Martinez, 3 wounded Border Patrol agents who should have died in Diamondback Canyon, might be the only ones who could stop it. 48 hours, he murmured, recalling the message on Vega's phone. That was the countdown to whatever Phase 2 entailed. 48 hours to identify the real conspirators, locate their base of operations, and prevent what could be the deadliest terrorist attack in American history. The sun was setting over the Arizona desert, painting the landscape in blood red hues. Night was falling on the longest day of Miguel Ramirez's life, a day that had begun with a birthday and an ambush, and now careened toward an uncertain, dangerous night. And dawn, when it came, would bring either salvation or catastrophe. The difference would depend on what they did in the hours of darkness ahead. Tucson Air National Guard Base hummed with activity despite the late hour. In a secure conference room, deep within the facility, Ramirez stared at the evidence wall they'd assembled over the past 6 hours. Photos, maps, timelines, and intelligence reports covered every surface, connected by colored strings that represented confirmed facts, red, suspected connections, yellow, and unknowns, blue. There were far too many blue strings. 42 hours remaining, Cruz announced, updating the digital countdown display. She'd refused medical leave despite her concussion, insisting her mind was clear enough for analysis work. Martinez sat nearby, his injured leg propped on a chair, methodically cleaning his service weapon, a nervous habit that no one bothered to comment on. Like the others, he'd been given the option to stand down. Like them, he'd refused. Colonel Patricia Reeves, commander of the Tucson base and Major Reynolds' former superior officer, entered with a tablet in hand. She'd been skeptical when they first arrived with their wild theories about compromised generals and bioweapons, but the evidence they'd presented had convinced her to grant them temporary sanctuary and resources. We've got something, she announced. Satellite imagery from the coordinates you recovered from Vega's phone. She placed the tablet on the table, displaying overhead images of what appeared to be an abandoned mining operation in the Sonoran Desert, roughly 60 miles northwest of Tucson. The Perdition Mine, she explained. Copper operation that shut down in the 90s, supposedly vacant, but the MAL imaging shows significant activity below ground in the past 24 hours. Ramirez studied the images. Thermal signatures? consistent. With 30 to 40 personnel and what appear to be specialized cold storage units. She swiped to another image. There's more. We intercepted communications indicating a convoy departed from near the Nogales CDC facility shortly after the breach. Its projected route would have taken it directly to the mine. The stolen research, Martinez concluded. And potentially the weapon itself, Ramirez added grimly. They didn't just steal the delivery system, they took whatever it was designed to deliver. Cole entered the room, followed by Corporal Chen. The Marine snipers had been assigned a security detail for Dr. Hitmen and his daughter, who were resting in a guarded section of the base. Whitman's been talking, Cole reported. The more he remembers about the project, the worse it sounds. Bad, Cruz asked. The delivery system was designed to disperse modified coronavirus variants, Cole replied. Allegedly for rapid vaccine distribution in pandemic scenarios, but it could just as easily spread weaponized pathogens, Ramirez finished. Did he give any details about deployment radius, effectiveness? A single aerosol unit could cover approximately 5 square miles, Chen answered. Microscopic particles remain viable for up to 6 hours in open air, longer in enclosed spaces, if deployed in a population center. No one needed him to complete the sentence. The implications were clear. A weapon with that capability could devastate a major city, potentially killing thousands before anyone realized what had happened. There's something else, Cole added reluctantly. Whitman confirmed that General Harmon had pushed for removing certain safety protocols from the design, specifically protocols that would prevent the system from being used with highly lethal pathogens. Colonel Reeves set her jaw. I've known Lawrence Harmon for 15 years. The idea that he would be involved in terrorism, maybe not terrorism, Ramirez interrupted. At least not how he would see it. What if he believed he was developing a defensive capability? Something to counter foreign bioweapons programs. That still doesn't explain Sangre Nueva's involvement, Cruz pointed out. Martinez looked up from his weapon. Follow the money. Developing black projects off the books requires funding that can't be traced. Who better to provide that than a cartel? With billions in cash. A partnership of convenience, Ramirez nodded slowly. Cartel provides financing, gets a cut of whatever profit comes from selling the technology to interested parties. Rogue military elements get their weapon without congressional oversight. Colonel Reeves sank into a chair, the weight of these implications settling over her. If you're right, this goes beyond a simple terrorist threat. This is a conspiracy involving elements of our own military and intelligence communities. Which is why we can't just call in the cavalry, Ramirez stressed. We don't know how far this extends or who we can trust. So what's the play? Cole asked. A small team infiltration of the mine. That's suicide, Colonel Reeves objected. Even with your sniper team, you'd be facing 30 to 40 hostile forces in their own fortified position. Not to mention the risk of the bioweapon being deployed if they feel cornered, Cruz added. Ramirez turned back to the evidence wall, studying the satellite imagery. We need to get eyes inside before we make any move. Confirm the weapon is there, identify key personnel, understand their deployment timeline. I might have a way, Chen spoke up, pointing to the mine layout. These old operations usually have secondary ventilation shafts, emergency exits. Many don't appear on official plans, but would be necessary for a facility that size. We find an unguarded entrance. Insert a small recon team. Cole nodded approvingly at his spotter. I'll go, Ramirez volunteered immediately. Not alone, Cruz insisted. I'd go too, but... Martinez gestured to his injured leg with obvious frustration. You'll coordinate from here, Ramirez assured him. We'll need someone managing communications and ready to call in reinforcements if necessary. Colonel Reeves considered the plan. This is beyond irregular. I should be reporting this up the chain of command. And if General Harmon is involved, Ramirez challenged. She closed her eyes briefly, the conflict evident on her face. 36 hours, she finally decided. You have 36 hours for reconnaissance only. If you find concrete evidence, I'll activate trusted units directly under my command. But if you're not back by then, I'm required to report your activities. Fair enough, Ramirez agreed. One condition, Cole interjected. Chen and I come with you, 2 border patrol agents and 2 Marine Scout snipers. Small enough to avoid detection, enough firepower to handle trouble. Ramirez exchanged glances with Cruz, who nodded slightly. Agreed. As they began planning the infiltration, Dr. Hitmen entered the room, looking exhausted but determined. I've been thinking about the safeguard I built into the delivery system, he said without preamble. It could be our advantage. All eyes turned to him as he approached the table. The system requires calibration to the specific pathogen it's meant to deliver. Done incorrectly, it creates a cascading failure, effectively neutralizing the weapon and rendering it harmless. He spread his hands. It's not much, but if you can access their lab, I can talk you through sabotaging the calibration remotely. Ramirez felt the first flicker of hope since learning of the weapon's existence. That could be our plan B if evacuation or containment isn't possible. I'm coming with you, Whitman announced suddenly. Absolutely not, Ramirez responded immediately. You're the person they want most, the one who can make their weapon fully functional. Precisely, Whitman countered, which makes me valuable to them. If something goes wrong, if you're discovered, I become your insurance policy. And your daughter? Cruz asked gently. Whitman's resolve faltered momentarily. Emma will be safer here under guard. And I need to fix this. My search, my responsibility. The room fell silent, the moral weight of his request hanging in the air. Finally, Ramirez spoke. We'll consider it. But first, we need gear, transport, and a solid infiltration plan. He turned to Colonel Reeves. What assets can you provide without raising flags? Unmarked transport, limited arms, basic tactical gear, she replied. Nothing that would trigger automatic reporting requirements. Beyond that, you're on your own. Ramirez nodded grimly. Then we'd better get moving. Dawn's approaching, and we need to be in position by nightfall. As they dispersed to prepare, Martinez called Ramirez aside, keeping his voice low. There's one more thing we need to consider. What if this isn't just about deploying the weapon? What if they're testing it? Testing? On who? Martinez's expression was grave. The timing lines up with that migrant caravan that crossed the border near Sasabe yesterday. Over 200 people, most processed through the temporary facility at Davis-Monthan. The implication struck Ramirez like a physical blow. The perfect test subjects. Minimal documentation, limited tracking, varied demographics for studying effects, and the facility is less than 30 miles from the mine, Martinez concluded. I'd bet anything that's their phase 2, a limited deployment to verify effectiveness before using it on a larger target. Ramirez felt cold fury building inside. Him. First Border Patrol agents, now innocent migrants, all expendable pawns in whatever game Vega and his mysterious partners were playing. We leave in 2 hours, he decided, and God help anyone who stands in our way. The desert night enveloped them like a shroud as they approached the abandoned Perdition mine. Their unmarked vehicle, a battered work truck that wouldn't draw attention, was parked 2 miles back, hidden in a dry wash. The rest of the journey was on foot, using night vision equipment to navigate the treacherous terrain without lights. Ramirez led the way, with Cruz covering their right flank. Cole and Chen moved with the silent efficiency of predators, their sniper rifles slung across their backs, replaced for now with suppressed M4 carbines better suited for close-quarters combat. Dr. Whitman followed in the center of their formation, his movements awkward but determined. Colonel Reeves had ultimately approved his participation, recognizing the technical expertise he brought might prove invaluable. Thermal imaging shows 3 sentries on the surface, Chen reported, studying. A handheld scanner, 2 at the main entrance, 1 patrolling the perimeter. Most activity is concentrated underground. What about the secondary entrance? Ramirez asked. Chen adjusted the scanner, focusing on the western edge of the mining complex. There. Minimal. Heat signature suggests a ventilation shaft or emergency exit. No guards visible. Cole studied the area through his night vision binoculars. Approaching from the wash would give us cover until the last 100 yards. After that, we're exposed. Time it with the patrol, Cruz suggested. We've been watching for 20 minutes. The perimeter guard passes that section every 12 minutes. Gives us about 7 minutes to reach the entrance and get inside. Ramirez noted with approval how quickly they'd coalesced into a functional team. Border Patrol and Marines working in seamless coordination, despite having met under fire just hours earlier. Next patrol passes in 2 minutes, Chen announced. We move immediately after. They waited in silence, each mentally preparing for what lay ahead. When the guard passed, continuing his clockwise route around the facility, Cole gave the signal. As one, they moved from cover, advancing rapidly across the open ground toward the secondary entrance. The entrance itself was almost invisible, a narrow steel door set into the rock face designed to blend with the surroundings. Chen made quick work of the lock with a specialized electronic bypass tool. The door opened with a protesting creak, revealing a dark passageway leading downward. No cameras, Cruz noted, scanning the entrance. They weren't expecting anyone to find this. Or, they're waiting inside, Cole countered, taking point as they entered the mine. Stay alert. The passage descended steeply, cool air rising from below, carrying the scent of machinery and chemicals. Their footsteps echoed despite their attempts at silence, the sound bouncing off the rock walls surrounding them. After descending nearly 300 feet, the passage leveled out, intersecting with a larger tunnel, illuminated by widely spaced emergency lights. Signs of recent activity were everywhere. Fresh boot prints in the dust, modern electrical conduits running along the ceiling, sensor equipment mounted at intervals. Which way? Whitman whispered. Chen consulted a digital map they'd constructed from satellite imagery and old mining records. Main laboratory should be in the central chamber, about half a kilometer east. That's likely where they're keeping the weapon. As they moved through the tunnel network, the signs of occupation increased. Modern doors had been installed at key junctions, some requiring keycard access that Chen bypassed with his electronic tools. Voice occasionally echoed from distant chambers, forcing them to pause and wait for silence before proceeding. This isn't just a temporary base, Cruz observed quietly. They've invested serious resources here. Approaching main research sector, Chen warned as they reached a heavily secured door. This one took longer to bypass, the security more sophisticated than the others. When it finally opened, they found themselves in a service corridor running parallel to a series of laboratory spaces, visible through observation windows. Scientists in hazmat suits moved between workstations, focused on equipment unfamiliar to everyone except Whitman, whose face paled as he recognized his delivery system, being integrated with what could only be the biological agent it was designed to disperse. They've already built 3 units, he whispered, horrified, each one capable of covering 5 square miles. Can you sabotage them? Ramirez asked. Whitman studied the setup through the window. Yes, but I need access to the calibration terminal. That workstation there, with the blue monitoring screen. Cole. Assess the laboratory. 4 scientists, 2 armed guards. No way to take them quietly. We wait, Ramirez decided. Observe shift changes. Look for an opportunity when the lab is less populated. They retreated to a maintenance alcove that offered both concealment and a view of the laboratory entrance. From their position, they could monitor personnel movements, while staying hidden from casual observation. Hours passed as they watched in rotating shifts, documenting the facility's patterns and personnel. What emerged was disturbing. A well-organized operation with military precision, staffed by a mix of cartel sicarios and what appeared to be American security contractors. Scientists worked in 6-hour shifts, suggesting the project was on an accelerated timeline. During one rotation, Cruz returned from scouting adjacent corridors, her expression grim. Found something you need to see. She led Ramirez to a secure door at the end of the service corridor. Through its small window, they could see a large chamber configured as a testing facility. Clear isolation chambers lined one wall, each large. Enough to hold a person. 3 of them were occupied. Migrants, Cruz whispered. Must have been taken from the processing center. Ramirez felt sick as he watched a scientist in full protective gear inject something into an IV line connected to of the chambers. The occupant, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20, immediately began convulsing. They're already testing it, he realized aloud. Not just the delivery system, the pathogen itself. They returned to the others and shared what they'd discovered. Whitman looked devastated. My research was meant to save lives during pandemics, not, he couldn't finish the sentence. That settles it, Cole declared. We've seen enough. We need to call in Colonel Reeves's team now. Agreed, Ramirez nodded. But first, we try to sabotage what we can and free those test subjects. He outlined a plan. Chen would access the facility's communications to delay any warnings, while Cole created a diversion at the far end of the complex. Meanwhile, Ramirez, Cruz, and Whitman would enter the lab during the upcoming shift change, sabotage the weapon systems, and then free the captives before retreating. Once we're clear, Colonel Reeves sends in her team to secure the facility and arrest everyone involved, Ramirez concluded. As they finalized details, a sudden commotion echoed from the direction of the main laboratory. Raised voices followed by the distinctive sound of a helicopter landing on the surface. Someone important just arrived. Cole guessed, moving to get a better view. Through their observation point, they watched as the laboratory doors opened and a group entered. Armed guards, first, followed by a distinguished man in his 60s, wearing an army general's uniform. Behind him came a familiar figure that made Ramirez's blood run cold. Alejandro Vega, looking no worse for wear after his capture and subsequent escape. General Harmon, Whitman confirmed unnecessarily. And he's not a prisoner, he's in charge. The final figure to enter the laboratory confirmed their worst fears about how high the conspiracy reached. FBI Assistant Director Clark, the man who would be coordinating the official investigation into Warren's death, strode in confidently, exchanging familiar greetings with both Harmon and Vega. The weapon isn't being built despite the government, Cruz realized. It's being built by the government, or at least a faction within it. And whatever they're planning starts soon, Chen added, checking his watch. Phase 2 is scheduled to begin in less than 12 hours. Ramirez watched as Harmon inspected one of the completed delivery units, nodding in approval as a scientist demonstrated its functionality. This was no longer just a mission to prevent a terrorist attack. They were witnessing a conspiracy that, if exposed, would shake the foundations of multiple federal agencies. Change of plans, he announced quietly. We need evidence, concrete proof of who's involved and what they're planning. Without it, this all gets buried, and the people responsible walk away clean. The testing chamber, Cruz suggested. There should be video records of the experiments. That's evidence Noon could ignore or explain away. I can access their research, data while sabotaging the delivery systems, Whitman added. The calibration terminal connects to their central database. Cole checked his weapon. Whatever we're doing, we need to do it now. That group won't stay in the lab forever. Ramirez nodded, decision made. Chen, get to the communications hub. Cole, your diversion needs to be big enough to draw most of the security force. Cruz, you and I will escort Whitman to the lab once it clears. We'll have minutes at most. As they prepared to separate, Martinez's voice came through their secure comlink. Ramirez, do you copy? We've got a situation topside. Go ahead, Ramirez responded quietly. Satellite shows multiple vehicles approaching your location. Heavy transport types. ETA 20 minutes. Whatever they're planning, I think it's moving ahead of schedule. The news sent a spike of urgency through the team. Their window for action was closing rapidly. Understood, Ramirez acknowledged. We're moving now. Have Colonel Reeves ready her response team. He looked at his makeshift strike force, 2 Border Patrol agents, 2 Marine snipers, and 1 civilian scientist, about to challenge a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. The odds were overwhelming, the stakes impossibly high. One way or another, he told them. This ends tonight. Diversion in 3, 2, 1. Cole's voice came through the comlink seconds before an explosion rocked the far side of the facility. Emergency alarms blared instantly, and security personnel rushed toward the source of the detonation. The Marine sniper had targeted a fuel storage area, creating maximum noise and confusion, while minimizing the risk of casualties. Ramirez, Cruz, and Whitman pressed themselves against the wall near the laboratory entrance, waiting for the response they anticipated. As expected, the doors burst open moments later. General Harmon emerged first, surrounded by protective guards, his face twisted with anger. Secure the weapons, he barked at the scientists. No delays. Load everything for transport immediately. As the laboratory emptied, only 2 scientists remained behind, frantically packing equipment under the watchful eye of a single guard. Vega and the FBI assistant director had already departed with Harmon, heading toward the main entrance. Now, Ramirez whispered, drawing his silenced sidearm. Cruz did the same, her movements fluid despite her earlier injuries. They slipped into the laboratory, quickly neutralizing the guard with a precision strike before he could raise an alarm. The scientists froze, raising their hands in surrender when Cruz leveled her weapon at them. Don't shoot. We're just researchers, one pleaded. Restrain them, Ramirez ordered Cruz, who used zip ties to secure the scientists to support columns. Whitman moved immediately to the calibration terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard. I need 5 minutes to sabotage the delivery systems and download the evidence. You have 3, Ramirez replied, securing the laboratory entrance. Martinez, what's the status on those incoming vehicles? 12 minutes out, Martinez responded through the comm. And Ramirez, satellite shows. Their military transport, official markings. The implication was clear. Harmon was bringing in legitimate military assets. likely unaware of the true nature of their mission. Once those forces arrived, distinguishing conspirators from unwitting participants would become nearly impossible. Cole, Chen, status, Ramirez called over the comm. Communications hub secured, Chen reported. I've downloaded their communication logs and disabled their ability to send outgoing messages. They're effectively blind to the outside world for now. I've set charges at key structural points, Cole added, ready to collapse the main entrance on your command. That should delay the arriving forces. Cruz finished securing the scientists and joined Ramirez at the door. What about the test subjects? We can't leave them. Ramirez checked his watch. Their window was shrinking by the second. You take Whitman to the extraction point once he's finished. I'll free the test subjects and meet you there. Miguel. Cruz began to object. Not negotiable, he cut her off. We need that evidence out, and Whitman's the only one who understands what he's downloading. You protect him at all costs. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. Don't be a hero. Never am, he replied with a tight smile. Just doing the job. At the calibration terminal, Whitman worked frantically, sweat beading on his forehead. Almost there. I've corrupted the calibration algorithms on the completed units. If they try to deploy them, the payload will neutralize itself within minutes of dispersal. What about the data? Cruz pressed. Downloading everything. Research logs, test results, personnel files, authorization codes. He inserted a specialized drive Chen had provided. 30 more seconds. Through the laboratory windows, Ramirez saw increased activity in the corridors. Security teams organizing a more coordinated response to the explosion. Their borrowed time was rapidly expiring. Chen, I need a secondary diversion, he ordered. Something to clear a path to the testing chamber. On it, the Marine responded. Moments later, the facility's fire suppression system activated, sprinklers dousing the corridors with water as additional alarms sounded. Got it, Whitman exclaimed, removing the drive and handing it to Cruz. Everything they've done, everyone involved, it's all here. Ramirez nodded to Cruz. Get him out. Use the ventilation shaft we entered through. Cole will cover your exit. Cruz gripped his arm briefly. 20 minutes. Then we're coming back for you. I'll be right behind you, he promised, knowing it might be a lie. As they separated, Ramirez moved rapidly toward the testing chamber, using the confusion from the sprinklers and alarms as cover. The facility had transformed into a scene of controlled chaos, security forces dividing between responding to the explosion, protecting key personnel, and securing the weapons for transport. Reaching the testing chamber door, Ramirez found it, locked with biometric security that Chen's bypass tools couldn't defeat. Through the window, he could see the 3 test subjects still trapped in their isolation chambers, one clearly dead, the others in various states of distress. He considered his options, then made a decision. Stepping back, he fired 3 silenced rounds into the control panel. Sparks flew as the system short-circuited, and the magnetic locks disengaged with an audible click. Inside the chamber, he moved quickly to the first isolation unit that contained a living subject, a young woman who stared at him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The controls were complex, but helicated the emergency release and activated it. The chamber hissed as it depressurized, allowing the door to open. I'm Border Patrol, he told her in Spanish, helping her disconnect from the monitoring equipment. Can you walk? She nodded weakly, her voice barely audible. They took us from the processing center, said we were being transferred to a medical facility. I know, we're getting you out. He moved to the second survivor, an older man who was unconscious but breathing. Freeing him from the chamber, Ramirez realized he couldn't carry the man and help the woman while maintaining an effective defense. His comlink crackled with Chen's urgent voice. Ramirez, we've got movement in your sector. Multiple armed personnel, converging on the testing chamber. You need to move now. Ramirez made his decision instantly. Chen, I need you at the testing chamber. Emergency extraction. 2 civilians, 1 unconscious. Copy that. 2 minutes out. Turning to the young woman, Ramirez pressed his backup weapon into her hands. Help is coming. Stay hidden behind that equipment. If anyone besides a Chinese-American Marine enters, use this. She clutched the pistol with shaking hands, but nodded firmly, her shock giving way to survival instinct. Ramirez positioned himself near the door, ready to hold off the approaching security team. Through the window, he could see shadowy figures, moving down the corridor, their weapons at the ready. When the first guard rounded the corner, Ramirez fired a disabling shot to the leg, forcing the others to pull back temporarily. He used the momentary advantage to tip a heavy storage cabinet across the corridor, creating a partial barricade. "Chen, status?" he called into his comm. 30 seconds, came the terse reply. A flashbang grenade skittered across the floor toward Ramirez's position. He kicked it back around the corner, the disorienting blast buying precious seconds as shouts and curses echoed from the corridor. Chen appeared from an adjacent service tunnel, moving with combat-trained precision. "Found an alternate route," he explained briefly, immediately assessing the situation. "I'll take the civilians. You cover our retreat." Together, they helped the young woman support the unconscious man, guiding them toward the service tunnels. They moved. Ramirez maintained suppressive fire, keeping the security team pinned down. "Go," he ordered Chen. "I'll hold them here, then follow your route." Chen hesitated only briefly before nodding and escorting the civilians into the tunnel. Once they were clear, Ramirez prepared to make his own escape, but fate had other plans. "Agent Ramirez," a familiar voice called from beyond the barricade. "I believe we have unfinished business. Alejandro Vega." "I'm touched you remember me," Ramirez called back, checking his ammunition. 4 rounds remaining, not enough for a prolonged engagement. "How could I forget the man who ruined months of careful planning?" Vega replied conversationally. "Though I admit, I underestimated you. Not many could have tracked us to this facility." "Your mistake was making it personal," Ramirez responded, inching toward the service tunnel. "Targeting Border Patrol agents guaranteed we'd never stop hunting you." Vega laughed, the sound echoing unnervingly through the corridor. "A necessary sacrifice to establish our cover story. Nothing personal, I assure you. Tell that to Martinez, to Diaz, to all the agents who died in that canyon. Casualties of a larger purpose," Vega dismissed. "Now, shall we end this charade? My men have the exit covered. The ventilation shaft your friends used has been sealed. There's nowhere left to run." Ramirez didn't believe him, but he knew his position was deteriorating rapidly. His comlink had gone silent, likely jammed. Chen would have reported his situation to the others, but there was no guarantee help would arrive in time. "What's the larger purpose, Vega?" he asked, playing for time. "What does Harmon gain from all this?" "Power, of course," Vega replied as though explaining something obvious. "The weapon will be deployed against a limited target. Regrettable, but necessary, creating justification for expanded military authority within US borders. Harmon becomes the indispensable expert on the new threat. The FBI takes control of domestic security under Clark's leadership, and in the chaos, certain border regions become less restricted, and your payment is control of those border regions," Ramirez concluded. "Trafficking paradise." "Precisely. Everyone wins, except the unfortunate test subjects, of course." As they spoke, Ramirez had been searching the room for alternatives. His gaze fell on a ventilation grate near the ceiling. Too small for a person, but perhaps large enough for something else. "One last question," he called, removing Chen's specialized drive from his pocket. "Did you really think we wouldn't make copies of the evidence?" That got Vega's attention. "What evidence?" Ramirez smiled grimly, though Vega couldn't see it. "Everything. Vega. The research data, the test videos, the communication logs between Harmon, Clark, and your cartel associates, all safely transmitted to multiple agencies by now." It was a bluff. The drive in his hand contained the only copy, but it was his last card to play. Vega's voice hardened. "Kill him! Now!" The security team surged forward, attempting to push past the barricade. Ramirez fired his remaining rounds strategically, not aiming to hit, but to force them back momentarily. Then, in a desperate gambit, he wrapped the data drive in his blood-stained Border Patrol badge, wedged it into the ventilation shaft, and pushed it as far as he could. The metal grate was blown, apart seconds later as multiple weapons fired into the testing chamber. Ramirez dove behind a reinforced testing console as bullets riddled the room, shattering equipment and puncturing the walls. When the firing paused, he found himself cornered, unarmed, with Vega and 4 security personnel entering the room, weapons trained on his position. "A valiant effort," Vega acknowledged, approaching cautiously, but ultimately futile. Ramirez raised his hands slowly, mind racing for options that no longer existed. "It's over, Vega. Even if you kill me, the evidence is out. Harmon, Clark, all of you, you're finished." Doubt flickered across Vega's face, just enough to suggest the bluff had landed. He gestured to one of Heisman. "Check the ventilation system. find whatever he hid. As the guard moved to comply, emergency lighting suddenly switched to red, and a computerized voice announced throughout the facility. Warning: critical structural failure detected. All personnel evacuate immediately. Warning: critical structural failure detected. Cole had triggered the charges. The distraction gave Ramirez his final opportunity. He lunged at the nearest guard, wrenching the man's weapon free and using him as a shield against the others. 2 quick shots dropped another guard before Vega and the remaining security personnel returned fire, forcing Ramirez to dive behind a toppled metal cabinet. The facility shuddered as explosions rippled through the main entrance. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling as support structures began to fail. In the chaos, Ramirez made his move, not toward the service tunnel, which was lightly guarded, but deeper into the facility where he'd noticed a mining elevator during their initial infiltration. Bullets followed him as he zigzagged between cover, Vega shouting commands to his men. One round caught Ramirez in the side, the impact nearly dropping him, but adrenaline kept him moving forward. Reaching the elevator, he slammed the emergency override button and stumbled inside. As the doors began to close, he caught a final glimpse of Vega's face, fury mixed with grudging respect, before another bullet pinged off the closing door. The elevator lurched upward, carrying him toward the surface as blood seeped between the fingers pressed against his side. The wound wasn't immediately fatal, but without treatment, it soon would be. His comlink crackled suddenly back to life, Cruz's voice breaking through the static. "Ramirez, do you copy? We've secured the evidence and the civilians. What's your position?" "Elevator. Heading to surface," he managed, each word an effort. "North side of facility. Wounded. Vega still in play." "Hold on." Cruz's voice was tight with concern. "Cole's positioned near the north exit. We're coming for you." The elevator slowed, then stopped with a mechanical groan. The digital display indicated he'd reached the surface level, but when the doors opened, he found himself not outside, but in a large equipment bay. Mining vehicles and transport trucks filled the space, and beyond them, the bay doors stood open to the desert night. Freedom was less than 50 yards away, but Ramirez's strength was fading. Blood loss and shock were taking their toll as he staggered forward, using the vehicles for support. He'd covered half the distance when the sound of a helicopter's rotors cut through the rumble of the collapsing facility behind him. Through the open bay doors, he saw a military transport chopper landing, its powerful searchlight sweeping the area. His comm activated again. "Ramirez, we've got a visual on you and an incoming helicopter. Can't tell if it's friendly or hostile." Before he could respond, a familiar figure appeared, silhouetted against the helicopter's lights, General Harmon, flanked by what appeared to be legitimate military personnel. Too weak to run, too stubborn to surrender, Ramirez braced himself against a truck and raised his captured weapon. If this was the end, he'd meet it fighting. "Drop your weapon, federal agents!" The command came not from Harmon's group, but from behind Ramirez, where Cole emerged from cover, his sniper rifle trained on the general and his escorts. Simultaneously, Cruz appeared at Ramirez's side, supporting him while keeping her sidearm ready. "You're making a grave mistake," Harmon called out, seemingly unconcerned by the weapons pointed in his direction. "I'm here under presidential authority to secure a compromised research facility. Lower your weapons immediately." "No, General," a new voice responded, as Colonel Reeves emerged from the helicopter, accompanied by a team of Air Force security personnel. "You're here to cover up crimes against American citizens and prevent the exposure of an illegal weapons program." Harmon's composure faltered for the first time. "Patricia, what the hell are you doing here?" "My job," she replied coldly. "Agent Martinez forwarded us the evidence, all of it. The president has been briefed. You're relieved of command, effective immediately." For a moment, it seemed Harmon might order his men to fight. Instead, a calculating look crossed his face. "Whatever you think you have, it won't stand up. This was a sanctioned black operation. National security protocols will ensure none of this sees the light of day." "Perhaps," Colonel Reeves acknowledged. "But the testing on American civilians, the murdered Border Patrol agents, there's no protocol that covers those crimes, Lawrence." As they spoke, Ramirez felt his consciousness slipping. The wound in his side had soaked his shirt with blood, and even with Cruz supporting him, he could barely stand. "He needs immediate medical attention," Cruz called out urgently. One of Harmon's escorts, a young officer who appeared genuinely shocked by the unfolding situation, stepped forward. "Sir, we have a medic on board." Harmon glared at the officer but made no move to stop him. The medic rushed forward, only to halt as the ground shuddered beneath them. The facility's structural collapse was accelerating, threatening the surface buildings. "This entire area is going to cave in," Cole warned. "We need to evacuate now." Colonel Reeves gestured to her security team, who moved to take custody of Harmon. "General Lawrence Harmon, you're under arrest for conspiracy, treason, and crimes against humanity." As they secured the general, Ramirez suddenly stiffened in Cruz's arms. "Vega," he gasped. "He was right behind me. The elevator." On cue, an explosion rocked the equipment bay as a secondary exit blew outward. Through the smoke and debris emerged Alejandro Vega, accompanied by the remaining security personnel and FBI Assistant Director Clark. They immediately opened fire on Colonel Reeves's team, forcing everyone to seek cover. The military helicopter's door gunner responded, cutting down 2 of Vega's men with precisely targeted bursts. Cole fired from his position, dropping another. But Vega and Clark had anticipated the resistance, using mining equipment as moving cover while they advanced toward a secondary helicopter that had appeared on the horizon. Their extraction plan. There. "Getting away!" Cruz shouted over the gunfire, still supporting Ramirez behind a fuel tanker. "Not if I can help it," Cole replied grimly, adjusting his position for a clear shot at the approaching helicopter. Through pain-blurred vision, Ramirez watched as the Marine sniper settled into his stance, controlling his breathing just as he had in Diamondback Canyon. 1 shot, 2 heartbeats. The crack of the rifle was nearly lost in the chaos, but its effect was immediate. The incoming helicopter's cockpit window spiderwebbed around a precision impact, and the aircraft veered sharply away, its pilot wounded or killed. Vega roared with rage, firing wildly toward Cole's position before dragging Clark toward a mining truck, their last escape option. Ramirez pushed away from Cruz, summoning his final reserves of strength. "Help me up," he ordered. "Miguel, you can't. One last time," he insisted. "Help me up." Understanding what he intended, Cruz positioned him against the tanker, steadying his aim as he raised his weapon. Vega and Clark were 30 yards away, almost to the truck. Ramirez remembered the canyon, the ambush, his fallen comrades. He remembered Martinez's wounded Legand Cruz's concussed determination. He remembered the test subjects, used and discarded like lab rats. His first shot caught Clark in the shoulder, spinning the FBI man around. His second struck the fuel tank of the mining truck, rupturing it. His third, his last, hit Vega in the leg, dropping him 10 feet from his escape vehicle. As fuel pooled beneath the truck, Cole completed what Ramirez had started. A final shot, this one deliberately aimed to spark against metal, ignited the fuel. The resulting explosion engulfed both Vega and Clark, bringing a fiery end to their conspiracy. "Target neutralized," Cole reported clinically, though satisfaction tinged his voice. Ramirez slumped in Cruz's arms, his strength finally exhausted. The medic reached them, immediately applying pressure to his wound. "Stay with me, Miguel," Cruz urged, her professional composure cracking as blood continued to seep between the medic's fingers. "We got them. It's over." "Not quite," he managed weakly. "Still, evidence needs to reach public." "It will," she promised. "Chen's already transmitted copies to trusted contacts in multiple agencies, and Dr. Whitman is prepared to testify about everything." The facility continued to collapse around them as Colonel Reeves organized the evacuation. Harmon was secured aboard her helicopter, his face a mask of cold fury as he watched his plans disintegrate. "We need to move him now," the medic told Cruz as he applied a field dressing. "He's lost too much blood." As they carried Ramirez to the waiting helicopter, he caught glimpses of the operation winding down. Military personnel securing the perimeter, evidence being collected from what remained of the surface's structures, the 2 rescued test subjects receiving medical attention. Martinez's voice came through his comlink, emotion breaking through his usually stoic demeanor. "Hang in there, Miguel. Drinks are still on me when this is over, remember." Ramirez tried to respond, but found he lacked the strength. Instead, he focused on the night sky above him, stars brilliant against the darkness as they loaded him onto the helicopter. Cruz remained, at his side, her hand gripping his. 9 minutes, she said softly. "That's how long it took us to decide who owned that canyon. Turns out it was us all along." As the helicopter lifted off, carrying him away from the collapsing perdition mine and the shattered conspiracy it contained, Ramirez felt a sense of completion. They had faced overwhelming odds, uncovered a plot that reached into the highest levels of government and emerged victorious, bloodied but unbowed. The cost had been high, too high. But the canyon belonged to those who defended it, not those who sought to exploit it. And in that knowledge, despite his wounds, despite the uncertainty that still lay ahead, Miguel Ramirez found peace as darkness finally claimed him. Ramirez drifted in and out of consciousness as the military helicopter raced toward Tucson Medical Center. Fragmented voices reached him through the haze of blood loss. BP dropping. Need more pressure. Stay with us, Agent Ramirez. When awareness returned, it came with the rhythmic beeping of hospital equipment. Cruz and Martinez were at his bedside, their faces showing relief and exhaustion. How long? Ramirez managed, his voice barely audible. 3 days, Martinez answered. You've been in and out. 3 days. So much could happen in 3 days. The evidence? He asked, fear churning beneath the medication haze. Safe, Cruz assured him. Everything has been secured by a joint FBI-DOJ task force established directly by the Attorney General. Whitman and his daughter are under protective custody, Martinez added. He's cooperating fully. Harmon. Clark. Clark died at the scene. Harmon is in military custody, but there are efforts to classify the operation as national security. The weapon? Never deployed, Cruz confirmed. Dr. Whitman's sabotage worked. The delivery system failed catastrophically, neutralizing the pathogen. Ramirez felt the tension drain from his body. They had succeeded. Against overwhelming odds, they had prevented a catastrophe and exposed a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of government. 3 weeks later, Ramirez stood at the podium in the Department of Homeland Security press briefing room. Beside him sat Cruz, Martinez, and Elena Vasquez, the journalist who had been a test subject and whose first-hand account had galvanized public attention. The evidence confirms that a rogue element within multiple federal agencies conspired to develop and deploy an illegal biological weapon on U.S. soil, Ramirez stated. Their intention was to create a controlled crisis, justifying expanded emergency powers and facilitating increased militarization of the border region. Cameras flashed continuously as journalists captured every word. The conspiracy involving high-ranking officials had transformed what might have been dismissed as a border security incident into one of the most significant government scandals in decades. After the press conference, Attorney General Rebecca Morrison met privately with Ramirez. What happened at Perdition Mine represents one of the most significant breaches of public trust in our nation's history, she said. The investigation will continue for months, possibly years. She slid a folder across the table. Ramirez opened it to find Department of Justice credentials and assignment papers for a new joint task force. Border Security Integrity Division, Morrison explained. A new unit with a specific mandate to investigate corruption within border security operations. Cross-jurisdictional authority, direct reporting to my office. Why me? Ramirez asked. Because when faced with an impossible situation, outgunned, outmanned, with no clear path to victory, you didn't surrender. You found a way forward. Ramirez looked at the credentials, then at his reflection in the conference room window. The man looking back had changed since that birthday morning at El Centro Station, harder in some ways, but more certain of his purpose. He thought of Diamondback Canyon, of the battle that had nearly claimed their lives, of the 9 minutes that had decided its ownership, of all the other canyons, literal and metaphorical, that still needed defending. Some canyons are worth fighting for, he decided. 6 months later, autumn painted the hills around Fort Huachuca in gold and crimson, as Ramirez stood at attention before the memorial. 5 new names had been added to the Border Patrol's Wall of Honor, the agents lost in Diamondback Canyon. Hard to believe it's been 6 months, Cruz said, joining him. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, Ramirez replied. Other times, like another lifetime. The Border Security Integrity Division had grown from their initial small team to a 30-person operation. Their mandate, investigating corruption within border security operations, had proven, unfortunately, necessary, with 3 major cases already concluded. That evening, Ramirez received a package containing a first-edition copy of Elena's book, 9 Minutes, The Battle for Diamondback Canyon and the Conspiracy Behind It. Inside was a handwritten note to Agent Ramirez and the team who saved more lives than they'll ever know. Some stories must be told, no matter how powerful those who wish them silenced. 1 year to the day since the ambush, Ramirez stood alone at Diamondback Canyon, paying silent respect. A simple stone marker stood where the initial attack had occurred. They held the line when it mattered most. His phone vibrated. General Harmon had been sentenced to life imprisonment. Justice, imperfect but real. Accountability, hard-won, but established. Footsteps approached behind him. "Thought I might find you here," Staff Sergeant Cole said, now in civilian clothes. "Aren't you supposed to be somewhere classified?" Ramirez asked. "Between assignments. Thought I'd pay my respects." They stood in silence, two men bound by experiences few others could comprehend. "Your division making a difference?" Cole asked. 3 major corruption networks dismantled. 17 compromised officials removed. New protocols established. Ramirez listed the achievements without embellishment. "It's a start." "More than most manage in a lifetime," Cole observed. The Marine reached into his jacket and withdrew Vega's gold-plated pistol, salvaged from Perdition Mine. "Thought you should have this," he said. Symbolic, maybe, but significant. Both men's phones buzzed simultaneously. 3 former Sangre Nueva lieutenants had been identified operating a new network across the California border. "Some battles never truly end," Ramirez observed. "Just change form," Cole agreed. As they prepared to depart, Ramirez paused for a final look at the memorial. "Do you ever wonder if it was worth it?" he asked. "The cost, I mean." Cole considered the question carefully. "In the moment, you don't get to know. You just do what needs doing. It's only later, seeing what was saved, what was changed." He gestured toward the horizon, where border towns continued uninterrupted by the catastrophe that might have been. "Yeah, it was worth it." They reached the canyon entrance, where their paths would diverge again. Cole to whatever classified operation awaited him, Ramirez to the ongoing work of institutional reform. "Until next time," they said, shaking hands. As Cole drove away, Ramirez remained a moment longer. 1 year ago, 9 minutes of desperate combat had determined who owned this piece of desert. His phone rang, crews calling with updates on their new investigation. The past receded as the present demanded attention. 9 minutes had decided who owned the canyon. A lifetime would determine what that ownership meant.